Okay, so the first part of chapter 8, is just identifying the characteristics of quadratic functions. So I'm only teaching you basically half of 8.1. Chapter 8 is highly graphing, but obviously I can't test y'all on being able to form a graph. So instead, we're just going to focus on identifying a graph. So for quadratic functions, that's what we're dealing with, right? So kind of what you did in chapter 9, where you solved quadratics using like radical functions or quadratic equations. Now you're just using that same parent function and graphing it. So your parent function for a quadratic function is always just f of x equals x squared. So always just x squared. And then everything else that we're dealing with are transformations of the graph. So as you can see here, your graph is a parabola. That's how you identify this parabola. And that just means like a U, as you can see here. Now you also could have an upside down U, so keep that in mind. And this just kind of goes through everything you're going to see. So a vertex, which is always just the point of either where it meets. So here would be your vertex. So it's either the top of the graph or the bottom of the graph. For this case, it is 0, 0. And then you also have your axis of symmetry, which is basically just what cuts your parabola in half. And it's always a dotted line. Okay, so that just goes through your vertex. It's always just the very middle. Kind of think about when you fold your parabola over, it's the same on one side that it is on the other. Okay, so that's your axis of symmetry. So let's start with just identifying this, just breaking this apart. And then these are just the 3 questions you're going to answer, and this is how your assignment is too. So on question 1, okay, your parabola opens up, so you can see the difference between questions 1 and question 2. Question 1, it opens up to the top. Question 2, it opens down to the bottom. Okay, so that right there identifies the reflection. So for question 1, there is no reflection because your parabola opens up. Now let's identify your vertex. Okay, remember that's the end. It's where everything meets. So it's basically the point of the curve, which in this case is all the way down here. Okay, and you're just identifying that point. So your vertex should always be an ordered pair. And remember, ordered pairs are xy. Okay, so this ordered pair, your x is 2. And then your y is -3. So our vertex is 2, -3. Your shift is basically where you moved from 0, 0. Okay, so it's basically your vertex just in word form. So our 2 was actually right 2 because you went right 2 from your middle. And then your y was -3, and that shift would be down 3. Okay, so same thing on 2. Let's start with our vertex, which is always where your curve meets. And as you can see here, it's now at the top because our parabola flips upside down. Now it's going down to the bottom. So our vertex is the same, it's just the point. So remember your x would go first, your x is this line. So it's at -3. And then your y is all the way at the top at 7. Okay, then your shift is just the words of that. So if it's -3 for your x, that means you're going left 3. And then if it's +7 for your y, that means you're going up 7. Now reflection over the x-axis, your answer would be yes, because now your parabola opens down. Okay, and that is it for identifying characteristics for 8.1. I'm just going to really quickly go over how you would graph these. You're going to have to answer this part right here in your assignment. So let me explain how you know that. And then I'm just going to go over a simple graph. You're not actually graphing, but this way you kind of know what I'm talking about as I answer those. So graph f of x equals 3x squared. Your form is ax squared. So whatever the number is in front is your a. Okay, so the way you're going to graph is by using three things. 1a, 3a, 5a. Okay, now that means you're taking your a, which in this case is our 3, and you're just multiplying it by those three numbers. So 1 times our a of 3, which equals 3. 3 times your a of 3, which equals 9. And 5 times your a of 3, which gives you 15. Okay, now here you're starting at 0, 0. And then all this means is you're starting with your 3. So this is what you're shifting either up or down from, are these numbers. And you're always going over 1. Okay, so the 3, 9, and 15 is what you're going either up or down. And then you're always going to go over 1. So from our vertex, excuse me, you're going to start by going up 3 and then always over 1. What you do on one side, you do to the other. Okay, then from that point, you're going to go up 9. And then you're going to go over 1. And what you do to one side, you also do to the other. We obviously can't go to 15 because that would go off the graph. Oops. And then you just connect your points, and that would be your graph. Now to answer if it's wider than x squared, same as x squared, or narrower than x squared. This has to deal with your a. Now the way you answer these, it's wider if your a is a fraction. It's same if a equals 1. And it's narrower if a is greater. No, let's re-say that. Let's say a whole number. That's easier for y'all to identify. Okay, so in this case, our a was 3. So if a equals 3, that's a whole number. So you would answer narrower than x squared. Okay, let's do one more. So here remember it's ax squared. So it's negative 1/2 x squared. Now to keep in mind, if there's a negative in the front, that means your graph flips upside down. So that means there's a reflection. So that's how you would answer those reflection questions. Okay, so then let's do the same thing, 1a to graph, 3a, and 5a. So ignore the negative, we're going to just automatically know that it flips upside down, so let's just multiply 1 times 1/2, because our a is 1/2, 3 times 1/2, 5 times 1/2. And you would just multiply these out. 1 times 1/2 is just going to stick with 1/2, so let's do 0.5 for the decimal. 3 times 1/2 would be 1.5. Remember, it's easier to graph decimals. And then 5 times 1/2 would give you 2.5. So again, you're starting at the vertex, or I'm sorry, at the middle of 0, 0. And just like we did at the first one, but instead of going up, we're going to go down because you have that reflection. So we're going to go down 0.5 to start. And then remember, you always go over 1. What you do to one side, you do to the other. Then from there, we're going to go down 1.5. And then over 1. What you do to one side, you do to the other. And then we're going to go down 2.5. What you do to one side, you do to the other. Always go over 1. And then connect your parabola. So it flips upside down. It now is opening downward because there's a reflection because you had the negative in the front. Now you're going to answer this question. So your a is 1/2. And then remember, it's the same as x squared if a is 1. It's narrower than x squared if a is a whole number, but it's wider than x squared if a is a fraction. So you would answer it's wider than x squared. Now you also might see questions where again it asks for if it's reflected over x-axis. And in this case you would answer yes because you have the negative in the front. Okay, and that's it for 8.1.